A very good evening to all our viewers, and welcome to today's edition of the Evening Review. My name is Toivon Jabela, your host. Tonight we are very happy to be joined in studio by Hopewell Chin'ono. He is a Zimbabwean investigative journalist who has gone through a lot, and he is also in the country on a mission to help the local media to circumvent their way past some of the challenges that we may have. Hopewell, thank you very much for making time. Really, it's such an honor. It's your first time in Namibia.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, it's my first time in Namibia, and I'm excited. It's one of the countries that I've always wanted to go, but for some reason never got around to doing it. So when an opportunity came for me to come, I had to stop everything that I was doing and said I will go to Namibia.
Wonderful. What are you in the country for? What mission are you on?
I'm here to attend the a media conference, which is looking at information rights for journalists and for all those that work within the media and work with the media.
Okay, and that I mean, you must be having a lot of valuable lessons in that regard. You're coming from Zimbabwe, and from what we are hearing, things are not very easy there for practitioners like yourself. Very muddy political space also there. What can you tell us about the environment back at home?
Well, the situation for the media at the moment is very difficult. It has been for years. Since the coup that brought in the current administration into power, they've made things difficult. We never thought that the bar would sink so low or lower than Mugabe's bar, but it has. The situation is worse than what it was under President Robert Mugabe in terms of how the media has been generally dealt with on a day-to-day basis. I'm an example of that. I exposed a massive scandal, corruption scandal, where public funds meant for COVID-19 were being looted by very powerful politicians and their surrogates. And some of the looting actually was done using Namibia.
I remember, yes.
And I was arrested for exposing that. And I've been arrested 3 times inside 6 months during the past 3 years for simply doing my work as a journalist. The first time I was arrested, the police came. They had 7 guns, AK-47s, and they hit one of my French doors, and they came in and pulled me out, walking on top of broken glass without shoes, all because that I'd reported that funds were being looted and that I had provided the evidence. I spent, all in all, during the 3 arrests, 85 days in prison. And thankfully, the cases have eventually been thrown out by the High Court. But I've had to spend 3 years going to court on remand, which shows that the Magistrates Court in Zimbabwe is totally captured by the political elites, because I was denied bail there each time I went there. Each application that I made, whether it's against the prosecutors or against the charge, was thrown out by the Magistrates Court. So the only place that is a bit of sanity left now is the High Court.
What was the grounds for the High Court arriving at that ruling?
The High Court, the first time they said that there was no case at all. In fact, the judge said he could not even acquit me because the details that were put before him did not provide for any charge. Then the second time, I was acquitted again by the High Court on the basis that I had been arrested using a law that does not even exist, and that there's no such crime as falsehoods. They put it together saying that I had reported on something and the facts were not correct, and the judge said there's no such thing as falsehoods under our statute. And in any case, I had not reported as they had said. I had not even talked about the issue that they had brought up. And then the third time, again, it was thrown out on the basis that there was no case. The state was accusing me of having spoken about a case which was pending before the courts. I spoke about the case on the 26th of October 2020, the court only got to hear the case on the 27th. So technically, there was no charge at all. But more importantly, I was arrested after having exposed that the president's niece, who had been caught trying to smuggle 6.7 kilograms of gold to Dubai, was going to get bail unopposed. I'd got this information through my informants who work within the judiciary system, who were upset that politicians were using their power to tell prosecutors what to do in order for the people that either work for them or their relatives who are involved in corruption let loose to go. And I was thrown into prison for 23 days for that, and I spent the past 3 years going to court on remand for something that I had not done. Yeah,
it must have been a very tough period for you, because you know, I follow you on Twitter. You do a lot of work, and you might have a bit of resources to pay lawyers and fight a battle and fight a system, as a matter of fact, that is so strong. If another Zimbabwean journalist, especially upcoming journalists, were subjected to that type of treatment, it must have been very difficult for them to even afford lawyers. I mean, what can you tell us about the impact of such behavior by the state on the finances of journalists?
The idea is to bankrupt you so that you stop practicing journalism, or that you stop writing the things that they don't want you to write. I was lucky that I was represented by the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, which is a donor-funded organization, so I didn't have to pay a penny towards my my legal representation. But the fact that they continuously targeted me, knowing that I've got an international profile, was meant to send a message to young journalists that if you think you can get away with exposing us, look at what we're doing to this guy. He's known the world over. He's an international journalist, and we're still able to do this to him. So it actually sent a very chilling message to young journalists, because some of them came to me and they said, we are now afraid of doing these stories. We might have to give you some of the stories because you've continued to report against corruption. We are afraid that if we're thrown into prison, we don't have the big name that you have, and people will not even get to know about us. If you are arrested, it's instantly on CNN, it's on Sky News, it's being reported in Namibia and South Africa, but we don't have such a big name, so we're afraid of reporting. So you're correct that there was a specific method to the madness, that if we arrest him, throw him into prison, the young journalists will be afraid to report on corruption.
Yeah. What I find interesting, Hopewell, is the fact that, I mean, of course, for us as Namibian journalists, when we hear those kind of stories, we get chills. You know, it's such a because we have a very good press environment here. Not perfect, but the fact that, for example, that a month ago, actually this month, that we were declared again #1 in Africa in terms of press freedom, it says a lot about the environment in which we operate in, and therefore it shocks us a little bit when we hear what is happening in Zimbabwe. Which brings me to the next point, and that is the fact that if my recollection is correct, Zimbabwe has an access to information law. And we have always said, look, because we have now also gazetted our first, just end of 2022. It is yet to be implemented because we have now to put in place some regulations and we need a commissioner, for example, that will oversee this kind of processes. And what I've always cautioned people in Namibia was to say, look, don't celebrate just by the fact that you have now this law coming. Zimbabwe has it, but this is the kind of environment that they are operating in. Is this some kind of messages that you're going to share with the team here in Windhoek that you're going to engage with?
Yes, indeed. We had a law called Access to Information, and it was enacted, I think it was 2000 or 2001. It's now been removed. But that law was actually used, contrary to what it says, to fight the media. Because you see, if you have a regime that does not respect the rule of law, no matter how good the laws are, no matter how good the constitution is, it will simply disobey. Zimbabwe probably has one of the best constitutions in the world. But the old laws have not been aligned to the new constitution. I call it new, but it's not new. It was enacted in 2013, so it's 10 years old. The current president was there. He was the justice minister, but he has no interest in making sure that the laws are aligned, because once the laws are aligned, the persecution, they have to do some extra stupid things to continue persecuting journalists or citizens in general. So our government does not respect the rule of law, because if it did, people like myself would not have been arrested in the first place. It didn't have to take me to court and arrest me, take me to court and throw me into prison using a law that does not exist. That is the action of a government that does not, that actually has no respect for the rule of law. So I think if Namibia is going down that route, I hope that the government continues to be as good as it has been so far in terms of respecting media space and respecting the right of journalists to practice their craft without being abused, without being intimidated, without being arrested or thrown into prison for simply reporting something that is as important as exposing corruption.
I mean, because you ought to be perceived as partners. I mean, we are not called the fourth estate for nothing. I mean, what is implied there really is that we are partners in the pursuit of truth, in the pursuit of accountability, and to be seen as enemies of the state. I mean, it's just very, very wrong. But there was an issue, there is now is an issue of the so-called Gold Mafia in Zim. And we saw again state actors, throwing around intimidations. What is the man who said on Twitter the other day that he was warning journalists that nobody should report on this thing?
It was the president's spokesperson.
Yeah, what is his name?
George Charamba.
Yes, George Charamba, absolutely. He put out on Twitter that, we are going to deal with whoever is reporting on this issue, implying that it was an extension of propaganda or something like that. And I deliberately monitored the press in Zim, and nobody was reporting on it, not the heralds of Zimbabwe, not Newsday, which I follow closely, and all these other publications, except the platforms that are run from abroad. People seemingly really being scared of that. Does that speak to just what you just said now, that indeed people are being suppressed and there's actually genuine fear among journalists to report on some of these things?
Yes, indeed. I mean, when the president's spokesperson came out and said that people will be arrested for reporting or for repeating what Al Jazeera had said, it was absurd. But that's how our life has been in Zimbabwe. It's been a life of absurdities. We live in a country where $165 million US worth of gold is smuggled out every month. That's about 1.8 billion US worth of gold. We live in a country where the whole public health sector does not have a single radiotherapy machine that is working, does not have MRI machines or X-ray machines, and at times central hospitals do not have something as basic as paracetamol, betadine, or bandages. So it's ridiculous for state actors to intimidate people who are exposing why the health delivery system is what it is today, why school kids do not have books, why roads are potholed. I mean, I was quite amazed as I was coming from the airport here in Windhoek to see how good the roads are. And I was like, I last saw roads like this in Zimbabwe when I was a kid. And our roads are so terrible because public funds are being looted, because the country's natural resources like gold are being plundered. And so coming back to the initial point I made, I was arrested in order to instill fear, and that fear still permeates through the media today. You see that the Gold Mafia reporting was very scant. Newsday, to some extent, tried to throw in some stories, but there was no analysis because they were afraid. And it was only, as you said, platforms that are domiciled outside Zimbabwe, and people like myself. And what I did was very deliberate. I first said I'm not going to report on this so that the international media like yourselves could see what was going on. And then I continued to report on it because I knew that there was nothing illegal about reporting about what has been said by a TV station, things that were said with evidence. People were speaking for themselves. Why can we not repeat that through our reportage? But the reason why we can't do that is because the powerful political elites in Zimbabwe were involved and are still involved in the plunder of the country's natural resources. And what we saw on those Al Jazeera films is self-evident that gold is leaving the country that way. But that was gold alone. You see, there's diamonds, there's lithium. There's so many things that leave our country illegally, and this is facilitated by the ZANU-PF political elites. And because the opposition has been muzzled, it has been emasculated, there are very few voices that speak out, and those voices become targeted in order to silence them. Because when I was in prison, one of the prison officers, very crude guy, came to me and said, Chamisa does not speak. Why are you speaking? Who do you think you are when the opposition leader is not speaking? You want to make yourself a hero. Now you are a hero, you're in prison. And very few people can withstand that kind of pressure. That's why you find that journalists, they tend to take the safer route, because as we are speaking, we have got a member of parliament who has been in prison for 340 days, Job Scala. He's been in prison for practicing his work as a lawyer, representing a family whose family member, a woman around, I think she was around 44, 45, who was killed by a ZANU-PF activist. And this guy, the lawyer, who is a member of parliament for the opposition, is in prison now for over 340 days. He's not been convicted of that crime, but he was denied bail, and they continue to deny him bail. So when young people see that kind of treatment being meted out to very senior people like Job Scala, who has been a member of parliament since 2000, they become very afraid, because one, the world does not come out and fight this kind of tyranny, and two, because everyone keeps quiet and they become afraid. Even the opposition leaders, his colleagues, are afraid, so they keep quiet. They can't march or protest in the street, although the Constitution allows them to do so, but they're terrified of going to prison, so they won't march. So they've been emasculated. So that's the kind of fear that terrible autocratic and regimes that rig elections, they behave like that. And that's what we are seeing in Zimbabwe.
What is the status now of the Gold Mafia saga? Has anyone been, is anyone being brought to book? Anybody being held accountable? What's happening there?
Nobody has been brought to book, and nobody is going to be brought to book. Nobody is going to be held to account for their actions, because the Gold Mafia scenes that we saw on Al Jazeera are driven by the powerful. What we saw were the runners. What we saw are the surrogates of the powerful. And as long as the powerful people are involved in smuggling of gold outside the country, there's nothing that will happen. The evidence was there. It was presented on TV. The whole world saw it. But you'd still find people like the spokesperson for the president that you mentioned, Joe Charamba, arguing as if, people had not seen the evidence. But that's the nature of kleptocracy. People that run their countries without care of the welfare of their own citizens behave like that. And that's what we're seeing. So as we head into another election, we are seeing signs that nothing is going to change.
Yeah. And for me, I thought now, Hopewell, that these issues, these challenges that the country faces, and the common man on the street in Harare or Gweru or wherever is facing, that they would somehow, that this situation will be fodder for change. That when people go to the elections in August, that they, against this background, will then decide, look, maybe it's time we give someone else a chance. But time and again, and this is not the first time, it's not like this only happened in the past 5 years of Mnangagwa's presidency. It's things that have been going on for decades. But come elections, somehow ZANU is claiming victory, whether by design or by default, I do not know. But where does this come from?
Well, it comes from the fact that, to start with, SADC, the regional body, does not have a bite. It only talks, but it does not act. Yeah. So Zimbabwe is allowed to do what it does. If you look at countries like Namibia, countries like South Africa, Botswana, where elections are still being held, and they're still being held within the prescriptions of the law. And then you wonder why such countries which are part of SADC don't hold their neighbor to the same level which they hold their own elections. It's surprising. But in Zimbabwe, the elections are rigged. Right now, there's no voters' roll. We don't even know who is on the voters' roll and who's not. The law allows you as a citizen, not even a political party, but just as a citizen, to go and demand a voters' roll, pay $5 and get an auditable voters' roll. By auditable, they're referring to something that you can put on a computer. Yeah. And it can be audited. But the government is refusing to do so. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, which is controlled by the state and the government, invariably ZANU-PF, is refusing to do that. So we're going to have a contested election again, and the region will continue suffering from the excesses of the political kleptocracy coming from Zimbabwe. People in Namibia should prepare for more Zimbabweans coming to Windhoek looking for jobs. People in South Africa should prepare for Zimbabweans coming to Johannesburg and Cape Town and Durban looking for jobs. People in Botswana and Gaborone, they should prepare for more Zimbabweans coming, because by nature, when a country fails to provide health services, as Zimbabwe does, we only have one working maternity at the biggest hospital. That working maternity was built by Ian Smith in 1977. And the fact that 2,500 women are dying every year giving birth, it means that women who are pregnant are afraid to give birth in Zimbabwe. So they come to Namibia, they come to South Africa, they come to Botswana. You can't falter them because they want to save their lives. So they will go where they feel they will get decent health care. So Zimbabwe's problem should not be treated as a foreign affairs problem by the Namibians or the South Africans or the Botswana or the Zambians. It's now a domestic issue for you here in Namibia, because you are going to have to carry the burden of healthcare for those that come. If I come to Namibia, if I fall sick, you have to look after me in your hospitals. Ordinarily, I would not want to come to Namibia. I would want to stay in my country. Zimbabweans should be going to other countries on holiday. But we are having to come to seek refuge because the situation in our country is unbearable. It's terrible. We don't have hospitals, we don't have jobs, we don't have good schools for our kids. So it's natural for people to move from one country to another until things stabilize. During the liberation struggle, Namibians had to leave. South Africans had to leave to execute the struggle from elsewhere. Yeah. And this is exactly what Zimbabweans are doing. They're executing a struggle in a different way. Their struggle is to feed their families. So they are coming to Windhoek, they are coming to Johannesburg to look for jobs, and they will continue doing so until SADC has the spine to decide that no, this cannot carry on. Former president of Mozambique, Chinono, said recently when he was in Zimbabwe that the Zimbabwean political crisis has made the region poorer. The region is struggling to attract investment because of the Zimbabwean crisis. So I hope that Namibians who are listening to us tonight will be able to reflect on those things and put pressure on their government.
Absolutely. Hopewell, thank you for coming in, really.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we are inspired by your work in Zimbabwe. We are following, and it's your courage in particular that inspires a lot of us, and we just hope that one day is one day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Nkoma. That's Hopewell Chin'ono. He is an investigative journalist from Zimbabwe who's been through a lot, and he came to the platform tonight to share his story with us. Thank you for watching.